See what happened when a black waitress turned the tables on an arrogant billionaire with her talent. In a world where power and privilege reign, some men believe their wealth makes them untouchable, that they can mock, belittle, and humiliate others for their own amusement. But tonight, one arrogant billionaire was about to face a reality he never saw coming. Mr. Whitmore, a ruthless tycoon known for his cruel sense of humor, lounged in his seat at an extravagant dinner party. His sharp eyes scanned the room until they locked onto Maya, a young black waitress moving silently between the guests, serving them with quiet grace. But to him, she was nothing more than entertainment waiting to happen. "I hear you play the violin," he said with a smug grin, his voice dripping with mockery. "Let's see what you've got. Play for us." Laughter rippled through the room. A waitress? Playing for billionaires? Surely it would be a disaster, a joke at her expense. But as Maya took a deep breath, lifted the violin to her shoulder, and closed her eyes, the energy in the room shifted. Then the first note rang out, pure, powerful, and breathtaking. The laughter stopped, the smirks faded, and soon the air was thick with something no amount of money could buy: awe. And as for Mr. Whitmore, for the first time in his life, he had no words, only silence and regret. You won't believe what happens next. Witness the power of raw talent. Like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Did this story move you? Let us know in the comments. A night of arrogance and unexpected talent. The candlelit dining hall glowed with golden hues as waiters moved swiftly between tables, refilling glasses and serving gourmet meals. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air as the city's elite indulged in expensive wine and idle gossip. At the head of the grandest table sat Mr. Charles Whitmore, a billionaire known for his ruthless business tactics and even colder heart. He smirked, swirling his wine as he eyed the guests around him. Senators, CEOs, and socialites all hanging on to his every word. Power dripped from his presence, and he loved nothing more than using it to put people in their place. His gaze soon landed on Maya, a young black waitress moving between tables with quiet efficiency. She was graceful, careful, and seemingly invisible to the wealthy guests who barely acknowledged her. But not to Whitmore. No, tonight she would be his entertainment. Leaning back in his chair, he tapped his fork against his wineglass, commanding silence. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we need a little entertainment," he drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. "And what luck! We have a musician among us." Maya froze, gripping the empty tray in her hands. Her heart pounded as she realized he was talking about her. "You there, girl," he continued, motioning toward her. "I hear you play the violin. Why don't you give us a performance? Show us what a waitress can do." Laughter erupted around the room. Some guests chuckled behind their hands, while others openly smirked. The idea of a simple server playing for a room full of billionaires was, to them, the perfect joke. Maya clenched her fists. This wasn't a request. It was a command. A spectacle meant to humiliate her. She could feel the weight of their eyes, waiting for her to stumble, to fail, to entertain them with her embarrassment. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. A moment of silence, a sound that shook the room. Taking a deep breath, Maya placed the tray on a nearby table and stepped forward. She met Whitmore's gaze, not with fear, but with quiet determination. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "I'll play." The room hummed with anticipation as a waiter quickly fetched a violin from the corner where the hired orchestra had left their instruments. Maya took it gently, running her fingers along the strings as if greeting an old friend. She could feel its weight, its history, and the music it was waiting to release. A hush fell over the room. Even Whitmore leaned forward slightly, waiting for the disaster he had orchestrated. Then she raised the violin to her chin, closed her eyes, and drew the bow across the strings. The first note rang out like a lightning strike, sharp, clear, and hauntingly beautiful. A ripple of shock went through the crowd as Maya's fingers danced along the fingerboard, pouring emotion into every movement. The melody soared, weaving through the air like silk, commanding attention with its raw power. The laughter stopped, the smirks vanished, people sat motionless, their glasses forgotten, their conversations silenced. They had expected a joke, a clumsy attempt from a mere waitress. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. Maya played with a passion that none of them had ever seen before. Each note told a story of struggle, of pain, of triumph. The room, once filled with arrogance and cruelty, was now spellbound by the power of a single woman's music. And Mr. Whitmore? For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. What happens next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned to witness the full power of Maya's talent. The room holds its breath. As Maya's bow touched the violin strings, an eerie stillness settled over the grand banquet hall. The opulent chandeliers above, shimmering with 1,000 tiny lights, cast long shadows over the faces of the guests, now frozen in anticipation. The hum of idle chatter, the clinking of silverware against fine china, all of it had vanished into the void of silence. Mr. Whitmore, the arrogant billionaire who had forced Maya into this moment of humiliation, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. He expected a feeble, awkward attempt, a desperate performance by a mere waitress struggling to hold her own against the judgmental eyes of the elite. But the moment Maya drew her bow across the strings, the air itself seemed to vibrate. The first note was not a timid whisper, but a bold declaration. A haunting, melancholic sound filled the room, swelling into a melody so rich, so deep, that it sent a shiver down spines. Guests who had once been eager to laugh now found themselves transfixed. The violin's voice was not struggling, it was commanding. It spoke of pain and beauty, of struggle and triumph. It was raw, real, and utterly captivating. A woman in an emerald silk gown clutched her pearl necklace, her breath catching in her throat. A distinguished older man, renowned for his refined musical taste, narrowed his eyes, his expression shifting from disinterest to awe. The waitstaff, usually invisible to the guests, paused in their work, drawn in by the power of the music. Even the grand piano, polished and untouched in the corner of the room, seemed to listen in reverence. And Mr. Whitmore? The smirk was gone. His fingers drummed against the table, his once relaxed posture stiffening. He had orchestrated this moment to belittle her, to turn her into an object of mockery. Instead, Maya had taken center stage. Maya's hands moved effortlessly, her fingers dancing across the fingerboard as if possessed by a force beyond this world. The violin did not simply play. It wept, it soared, it roared with defiance. Every note told a story of a little girl who once sat on her apartment floor, her first violin, a second-hand, scratched instrument, balanced on her lap. Of countless nights spent practicing by candlelight, her mother's encouragement the only thing keeping her going. Of rejection after rejection, doors slammed in her face because she didn't fit the image of what a true musician was supposed to be. But she had never stopped playing. And tonight, she played not for their approval, not for their amusement, but for herself. The song built in intensity, the bow moving faster, the melody climbing higher, until it felt as if the very walls of the room could barely contain its power. A young woman near the back of the hall wiped a tear from her eye. Another man, who had been resting his chin on his hand with a look of boredom just moments ago, now sat upright, his eyes locked onto Maya, as if seeing her for the first time. Mr. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His confidence had been a towering skyscraper, built on the illusion of control. But with each passing note, Maya was tearing it down brick by brick. She wasn't some nameless waitress anymore. She wasn't beneath them. She was above them all. Her music had become a mirror, reflecting their own arrogance, their own ignorance. They had dismissed her, mocked her, but now they were powerless against the force of her talent. As the final notes rang out, Maya held the last vibration just a little longer, letting it echo into the stunned silence that followed. The sound lingered in the air like an unanswered question, one that no one in the room could ignore. And then, for the first time that night, no one dared to speak. No laughter, no whispers, no snide remarks, just silence. The kind of silence that only follows something truly extraordinary. Maya slowly lowered her violin, her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. She could feel the weight of 100 stunned gazes pressing down on her, but she refused to shrink under them. Instead, she stood tall, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths as she absorbed the silence that followed her performance. Across the grand dining hall, eyes once filled with condescension now held something else entirely: awe, respect, even shame. No one dared to break the moment, not the guests, not the servers, not even the arrogant Mr. Whitmore himself. The billionaire, who had set this up as a cruel joke, found himself at the center of an unspoken reckoning. His smirk was long gone, his jaw tight, his fingers still frozen mid-tap on the pristine white tablecloth. His guests, people who always sought his approval, who laughed at his jokes no matter how cruel, were looking at him now, waiting for his response. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. Then, like a single drop breaking the surface of a still lake, a sound shattered the silence. Clap, a single pair of hands applauding. It was hesitant at first, uncertain, as though whoever started it wasn't sure if it was allowed. But then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite, half-hearted clapping reserved for background entertainment. No, this was something else entirely. This was thunderous. This was raw, genuine admiration pouring from people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite explain. Maya stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't what she had expected. She had braced herself for more laughter, more mockery. But this was the sound of respect. The woman in the emerald gown who had once clutched her pearls now wiped away a stray tear. A renowned composer in the back nodded in approval, his eyes gleaming with newfound appreciation. Even some of the other waitstaff, those who had spent their lives invisible to the rich and powerful, exchanged knowing glances, because tonight one of their own had made them see. But the most satisfying reaction of all? Mr. Whitmore. His hands remained motionless on the table, his eyes dark with something he rarely ever felt. Powerlessness. He had orchestrated this entire situation to prove a point, to remind Maya and everyone else in the room of their place. But the moment she played that first note, she had rewritten the script. This wasn't his game anymore. It was hers. His guests, his people, were no longer looking at him with admiration. Instead, they looked at him with something dangerously close to pity. Because tonight, the billionaire had been bested not by another tycoon, not by another man in $1,000 suit, but by a waitress with a violin and the kind of raw talent that money could never buy. He clenched his jaw, pushing back his chair abruptly. The legs scraped against the marble floor with a harsh screech. The applause faltered, the tension returning. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as if the fabric had suddenly become suffocating. His face, normally a perfect mask of control, twitched ever so slightly. "I suppose," he said, his voice unnervingly calm, "that was unexpected." Maya didn't say a word. She simply tilted her head slightly, watching him. She didn't need to respond. The room already knew who had won. A waiter, one of Maya's colleagues, rushed to her side, eyes wide with pride. "That was incredible," he whispered, his voice almost giddy. Maya turned back to the audience, a small smile playing at her lips. She dipped into a graceful bow, acknowledging the applause but not basking in it. This wasn't about proving herself to them. It was about proving to herself that she never needed their validation in the first place. As she straightened, she met Mr. Whitmore's gaze one final time. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, her voice steady, confident, and with that she turned on her heel, violin in hand, and walked away. Not as a waitress, not as a victim of mockery, but as the woman who had turned the tables on one of the most powerful men in the room. The music was over. But the lesson? That would linger far longer than any melody. Tonight was supposed to be a joke, a cruel game played by a man who believed his wealth gave him power over others. But instead, it became a moment of reckoning. Maya's talent shattered expectations, silenced laughter, and reminded everyone in that room of a simple truth. Greatness isn't defined by wealth or status. It's something that burns within, waiting for the right moment to shine. Mr. Whitmore thought he could humiliate her. Instead, he became the one humbled. This story isn't just about music. It's about resilience. It's about standing tall in the face of arrogance and proving that true talent, true worth, cannot be bought or mocked. What did you think of Maya's incredible moment? Let us know in the comments below. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful and uplifting stories, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.